afternoon. My name is Jisoo Kim. I'm Director of the Institute for Korean Studies here at GW and also Korea Foundation Associate Professor of History, International Affairs, and Institute of Languages and Literatures. Wow, what a great turnout. Thank you all for coming today and also for people joining us via Zoom. Welcome to our first Korea Policy Forum of this spring semester. For our first Korea Policy Forum event, we're extremely honored and privileged to host the former Prime Minister of South Korea, Lee Nak-yeon's talk today. He has been affiliated with us since last June, and I know he's been researching and writing a book about denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula, and we are so privileged to be able to hear his views today based on what he's been researching. Well, thanks to our audience, both in person and virtual, once again, for joining us. For those of you joining virtually, please submit your questions to the Q&A box. I'll try to ask as many questions as possible during the Q&A session. In addition to Prime Minister Lee, we have another honorable guest with us today, Dean Alyssa Ayres. Despite her busy schedule, I want to thank her for being with us today and introducing our Prime Minister Lee. I'll first have the honor to introduce Dean Ayres. She'll then introduce Prime Minister Lee. Dr. Ayres is the Dean of the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. She is a foreign policy practitioner and award-winning author with senior experience in the government, nonprofit, and private sectors. From 2013 to 2021, she was a senior fellow for India, Pakistan, and South Asia at the Council on Foreign Relations, where she remains an adjunct senior fellow. Her work focuses primarily on India's role in the world and on U.S. relations with South Asia and the larger Indo-Pacific. From 2010 to 13, Dean Ayres served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia. Please join me in welcoming Dean Ayres.
Thank you, Professor Kim, and let me just underscore how she opened today by saying, wow, what an incredible group here gathered to hear what I think would be a very important set of remarks on a realistic and pragmatic approach to denuclearization and peace on the Korean Peninsula. Now, as everyone here, I am sure, is well aware, North Korea's nuclear problem has been one of the most important topics, urgent topics discussed in Washington, but over the last 3 decades. So it's a long-standing problem and one that has defied resolution. North Korea's nuclear capability has been increasing in size and sophistication. North Korea has even listed conditions for preemptive nuclear attack against other countries in their own law. And yet we don't, as a policy community, have a clear idea of how this problem can be solved. Our nuclear negotiations with North Korea are at a stalemate despite decades-long diplomatic efforts. The pandemic itself led Pyongyang to an unprecedented period of self-isolation. And the strategic tensions, the strategic rivalry between the United States and China, now intensifying, has created strategic maneuvering room for North Korea. So let's take an opportunity today to review the history of North Korea's nuclear problem and take a look at the fundamental issues that led to the current stalemate. We are so delighted to have our distinguished special guest to offer insights on this topic, someone who, as you all know, has hands-on experience and deep knowledge from the South Korean side. Former Prime Minister of the Republic of Korea, Honorable Nak-yeon Lee, is also a visiting scholar with us here at the Elliott School at GW Institute for Korean Studies. He served as the Prime Minister under the Moon Jae-in government, where he watched all interactions between Presidents Moon, Trump, and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un from his office. Let me read his formal bio for you. It's very impressive. Nak-yeon Lee is a former Prime Minister of the Republic of Korea who served under the Moon Jae-in administration. He graduated from Seoul National University, with a degree in law, and became a journalist at Dong-a-ilbo. After 21 years as a journalist, so he knows how to ask questions, he entered politics and served 5 terms as a member of the National Assembly. During his 4th term in 2014, he became the governor of Jeollanam-do province until President Moon nominated him as his first prime minister in 2017. He was also elected as the chairperson of the Democratic Party of Korea in the year 2020. During his years in public affairs and public office, he has focused on both domestic and international affairs of South Korea. And as prime minister, he was responsible for overall domestic issues, including the safety of citizens and society. He was a member of the Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee of the National Assembly, in which he worked towards a peaceful inter-Korean relationship. And as I mentioned, he now serves as a visiting scholar at the GW Institute for Korean Studies, where his research focuses on the peace-building process on the Korean Peninsula. I think having heard that background, you'll appreciate that there is no one better positioned to provide insights into the current crisis and to offer thoughts on a better approach to denuclearization and peace on the Korean Peninsula. And our speaker today, our honorable speaker, former Prime Minister Na Kyung-lee, welcome you to the podium.
Thank you for your kind introduction. Director Kim and Dean RS Elliott School. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here with me. It's a great honor for me to share my research today with the title of Realistic and Pragmatic Approach to Denuclearization of and Peace on the Korean Peninsula. At first, I'd like to ask you a serious question. What do you think is the most widely spoken language in the world?
Broken English.
Yes. Answer is broken English. I think you will be able to hear the most popular language in the world for about 35 minutes. Since the onset, the first North Korean nuclear crisis in 1993, the United States and South Korea have been engaged in intermittent negotiations with Korea for denuclearization. But the attempts of four U.S. presidents, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump, failed in the end. What were the reasons the nuclear talks with North Korea failed? Here I summarize sources of the failures, 5 reasons shown on screen. Reason 1 is disregard for North Korea's desire for survival. North Korea's nuclear development is a compound and convoluted issue. Many analysts have seen the North Korea issues mainly through the lens of ethics. North Korea's authoritarian government, human rights violations, and nuclear development deserve condemnation. North Korea's victim mentality and its perception of threat to national security necessarily justify its nuclear program. However, it is not possible to succeed in denuclearization talks with North Korea without addressing its perception of security threat and desire for survival. North Korea of today is a product of violent and painful past. During the 1950 to 1953 Korean War, waged by North Korea, the U.S. armed the North with its overwhelming firepower. As a result, North Korea lost approximately 20% of its population, 50% of its urban area, and 80% of its social infrastructure. The U.S. even considered use of nuclear weapons during the war, though ended with armistice agreement, not with a peace treaty, leading to Korea's resigned state of the war for the next 70 years. North Korea has been in confrontation with the U.S., the most powerful nation in the world, even since the Korean War. From 1958 to the end of the Cold War in 1991, the U.S. deployed up to 950 tactical nuclear weapons to South Korea. They were meant to be defensive in purpose for US and South Korea, but could be perceived as a nuclear threat to North Korea. In the early 1990s, when post-Cold War era began, South Korea established diplomatic relations, Communist China, the Soviet Union, as well as Eastern European and Central Asian countries. With the expansion of its diplomatic horizons, South Korea's economy also began to grow dramatically, helped by rapid export growth. On the contrary, North Korea was allies and partners for trade and economic cooperation. North Korea wanted to normalize its relations with the US and Japan, but failed to do so as South Korea obstructed it and the US ignored the call. The US opened the post-Cold War era and South Korea used it to its advantage. But both South Korea and the US held on Cold War era thinking and attitude towards North Korea. The North Korean nuclear crisis was born out of such a context. On September 8, 2022, Kim Jong-un declared that North Korea would neither give up on its nuclear weapons nor negotiate on denuclearization. He added, the purpose of the United States is not only to remove our nuclear might itself, but also to eventually force us to surrender or weaken our right to self-defense by taking away our nukes so that they can topple our regime at any time. Kim's statement shows North Korea's strong victim mentality and perception of security threat. The US has asked North Korea to denuclearize itself, and North Korea has asked the US for security guarantee through the peace treaty and diplomatic normalization. Due to the lack of mutual trust, however, each side asked the other to act first. North Koreans believe that if they denuclearize first, the US does not keep its promise, they will end up losing means for self-defense. The desire for survival is far more essential than any other need, not only for an individual, but also for a nation. Reason two is miscalculations on North Korea collapse theory. Many analysts believe that the North Korean regime would collapse like other socialist countries in the presence of external and internal pressures and shocks. Screen shows some examples of the North Korea collapse theory. However, the North Korea collapse theory proved to be a fallacy. The regime survived the deaths of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il and decade-long arduous march in the 1990s, during which at least hundreds of thousands of North Korean people starved to death. North Korea refused to hold the number of tough economic sanctions imposed on it. Rather, North Korea tended to strengthen animosity towards the outside world and internal solidarity in the face of external pressures. North Korea collapse theory led Washington and Seoul opposed to negotiating with Pyongyang or take a passive stand towards it. The assumption that North Korea's collapse was impending led them to unduly rely on sticks, such as economic sanctions, and caused them to wait out till North Korea collapsed or surrender. When the situation became dire, the US agreed on carrots. The collapse theory left the US hesitant to implement the agreements. Such attitude ultimately stirred up North Korea's victim mentality and desire for survival, making it further obsessed with nuclear armament. Pushed to isolation with the end of the Cold War in the early 1990s, North Korea aggressively pursued negotiations with the US. the two Koreas adopted joint declaration on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and the US DPRK talks began. North Korea asked for diplomatic normalization with the US, even putting on the table an offer that in return it could retract its demand to withdraw the US troops in South Korea. However, the US was lukewarm at best with the talks due to the assumption of North Korea's impending collapse. That was how the window of opportunity was missed to prevent the first North Korean nuclear crisis in 1993. During the first North Korean nuclear crisis, Kim Il-sung died in July 1994. The US signed the agreed framework in October that year, which contained such clauses like building lighter reactors in North Korea. However, the lighter reactor idea never came to fruition. There is testimony that even the officials from the Clinton administration who took part in working out the deal, let alone the Republicans, assumed North Korea's collapse before completion of lighter reactors. Reason 3 is overplaying effectiveness of pressure campaigns. The international community, led by the US, has imposed economic sanctions on North Korea for 70 years after the Korean War. With every nuclear missile test by North Korea, external sanctions grew tougher. Many policymakers in the US anticipated that North Korea would not be able to bear the pain and either implode or surrender. However, unlike the anticipation, North Korea rapidly advanced its nuclear capabilities and became more dependent on China. North Korea agreed on holding a summit meeting with the US in 2018. President Trump claimed that his pressure campaigns paid off and brought North Korea back to the negotiating table. However, in 2016 and 2017, and economic sanctions and military pressures were at their height, North Korea declared completion of its nuclear forces, following the 5th and 6th nuclear tests and multiple missile launches. Indeed came to negotiation with the US because he was confident of the country's nuclear capabilities, the leverage for negotiations. Moon Jae-in administration's mediation diplomacy also facilitated negotiations. North Korea proposed lifting of 5 economic sanctions that had the greatest impact on its private sector economy in return for dismantlement of the Yongbyon nuclear site from the Hanoi Summit in 2019. Trump walked out of the meeting, urging that North Korea was prioritizing solution of the sanctions and would ultimately succumb to the US demand for CVID, or complete verifiable and reversible denuclearization, if he maintained the sanctions. However, North Koreans claimed that they had asked the US to lift economic sanctions because they thought it would be an easy ask for the US, and their goal was to reach a small deal in Hanoi and keep the momentum of negotiations going. Since that time, North Korea has not demanded the US to lift economic sanctions. The US side overestimated the effectiveness of economic sanctions. During that period, North Korea's trade dependence on China rose dramatically. Around 2000, and South Korea's sunshine policy was in place. South Korea, China, and Japan each account for 20% in North Korea's trade. But afterwards, China's proportion went to 40% in 2007 and to almost 90% in 2017. China has been engaged in trade with North Korea and providing aid necessary for survival of the regime. And in 2022, despite North Korea's ICBM launches, China, along with Russia, vetoed additional sanctions on North Korea. Reason 4 is lack of consistency in policy. North Korea policies often flipped with changes in domestic politics, both in South Korea and the US. Policies were sometimes exploited for domestic political purposes. This makes it difficult to reach an agreement negotiating table. Even if an agreement is reached, there is less trust on it, or the likelihood of its implementation is low. North Korea may doubt the intent of its counterparts and keep looking for a pretext to continue with nuclear development. President Clinton was able to freeze North Korea's nuclear activities under the agreed framework in 1994. But Republicans' landslide victory at the midterm election made it hard to secure a budget to implement the agreement. Clinton initiated the Paris process, the cooperation with President Kim Dae-jung in 1999, North Korea's launch of the Podong missile in 1998. Process led to mutual visit by North Korean Vice Marshal Jo Myung-no and Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, as well as the U.S. DPRK joint communique 2000. And President Bush took office in 2001. However, he did not utilize that diplomatic momentum and reversed key policies under the Clinton administration. Later on, when Clinton met with Kim Dae-jung in Seoul, he said, "If I had that one more year in the office, it will have changed the fate of the Korean Peninsula." Such problems are more severe in South Korea. North Korea policy is the most polarizing factor in South Korean politics. I will not illustrate each case in detail as expected, but an administration's change hands in the two major parties in Korea. North Korea policies got violently overturned. Reason 5 is trap of perfectionist approach. Washington often attempts to get everything at once from its negotiations with Pyongyang. At times, even before implementing what was agreed upon with North Korea, the US brought up much more fundamental demands that went beyond the existing agreements and broke the deals. The Clinton administration froze North Korea's plutonium-based nuclear development and promised North Korea provision of heavy-fueled oil in return for the 1994 agreed framework. However, when the Bush administration received intelligence on North Korea's copper, HEU, or highly enriched uranium program in 2002, it sent Assistant Secretary of State James Kelly to Pyongyang to press North Korea hard on it, suspended the heavy-fuel shipments, ultimately putting an end to the accord. Between 1994 and 2000, North Korea's plutonium reprocessing facilities remained frozen to the agreed framework, but the Bush administration stance allowed the North to unseal the plutonium reprocessing facilities by scrapping the agreed framework in the name of punishing North Korea for the alleged HEU program. The presence of the HEU program fully confirmed and was only at the laboratory level if it existed. Even if it existed. In the end, North Korea's first nuclear test in 2006 was conducted with plutonium reprocessing, not with the HEU program. If the Bush administration had maintained the agreed framework while dealing with HEU issue via separate talks, it would have prevented or at least delayed North Korea's first nuclear test. During the second North Korean nuclear crisis, the Bush administration reached an agreement through the six-party talks in 2005 and 2007. The sight of North Korea blowing up the cooling tower was globally broadcasted in 2008, and the country turned in its information. However, Bush administration demanded North Korea far-reaching verification plan for special inspection. It was ahead of the step agreed upon at the six-party talks, and North Korea refused to comply with that demand. The existing agreements fell apart. The Bush administration coined the term CBID, and Trump administration also used CBID or FFBD, or final and fully verifiable denuclearization. CBID is an end state. However, John Bolton, National Security Advisor in the Trump administration, demanded CBID as a precondition to North Korea, citing Libya model. Knowing what happened to Libya and its leader Gaddafi, North Korea rejected the model of denuclearization first and years later on multiple occasions. Putting it back on the table was breaking the deal rather than making it. Trump walked out of negotiations with Kim Jong-un at Hanoi Summit in 2019, saying that dismantlement of the Yongbyon nuclear site was not enough to fight economic sanctions since other nuclear programs than Yongbyon site included. However, some nuclear scientists see the Yongbyon site part of North Korean nuclear program, accounting for up to 90% of its total nuclear capability. Dr. Jacob Tackle, a nuclear scientist at Stanford University, said that even if North Korea immediately started the nuclearization process, it would take at least 10 years before complete nuclearization. It would have been more pragmatic. The US had lifted those economic sanctions to dismantle the Yongbyon site first, and then moved on to the next phase to address other nuclear programs. Now, I'd like to offer some recommendations. Washington and Seoul's policies toward North Korea should start with the objective assessment of North Korea. As you can see in the screen, the 1999 Perry report said, United States must therefore deal with the North Korean government as it is, not as we might wish it to be. And United States must initiate negotiations with the DPRK based on the concept of mutually reducing threat. From an outsider's perspective, North Korea is a country with many ethical and political flaws. However, it is also a country with a deep-rooted sense of threat, fortified by decades of confrontation and mistrust toward the US. That is why a perfectionist all-or-nothing approach pushes CBID or FFBD as a prerequisite for negotiation is unrealistic and it has also been proven counterproductive to elect North Korea and apply continuous pressure and wait for the regime to collapse, which ended up exacerbating the situation and stopping North Korea's ambition for nuclear and missile development. To increase the chance of successful negotiations, the issue of North Korea's denuclearization should be addressed in parallel with mutually reducing threats and improving relations between the US and North Korea. Negotiations need carrots as well as sticks. Washington and Seoul need to come up with a long-term roadmap for negotiating with Pyongyang and pursue a sustained and consistent line of efforts that will not be hampered by shifts in domestic politics in the short run. In the six-party talks in 2005, participating states agreed to implement the deal in a phased manner based on the principle of commitment for commitment, action for action. Washington and Pyongyang must act towards denuclearization and diplomatic normalization an incremental, simultaneous, and reciprocal manner to overcome their entrenched mutual mistrust. There is a domestic climate within the U.S. that improving relations with North Korea is not something desirable or necessary. That stance ultimately resulted in the advance in North Korea's nuclear capabilities and its deepened reliance on China today. This is in the interest of either the world or the U.S. Some policymakers or analysts also argue that progress with regard to denuclearization of and peace on the Korean Peninsula, including an end-of-war declaration of improvement of the inter-Korean relations, would reduce footprint of the U.S. troops in South Korea and undermine the ROK-U.S. alliance. That is nothing more than a tunnel vision. The end of the Cold War did not jeopardize status of U.S. forces in Germany and in Japan, as well as the U.S. alliance with the countries. Kim Dae-jung believed that the presence of the U.S. forces here is necessary, even if the peaceful reunification of the peninsula for the sake of the peace in the broader region, and I agree with him. The U.S. and Japan improve relations with North Korea. They will gain a greater leverage on North Korea. It can induce desirable changes from the country. With no relations comes no influence. If the U.S. and Japan had established diplomatic relations with North Korea in the early 1990s, when South Korea did with the Soviet Union and China, we may not have North Korean issue today. You can see on the screen, the U.S. agreed on normalizing relations with North Korea on multiple occasions. The U.S. also agreed to end the Korean War, but those agreements fell short of implementation. I do not see a reason the U.S. cannot have ties with North Korea. North Korea also needs to take convincing measures to denuclearize itself to improve its relation with the U.S. and earn recognition as a responsible member of the international community. North Korea should no longer work down path of isolation and confrontation. It should not give up on the inter-Korean reconciliation, cooperation, as well as normalization of ties with the U.S. North Korea can replicate the rapid growth China and Vietnam enjoyed in the 1970s and 1990s effectively, once they embraced the idea of improving relations with the U.S. and openness and reforms. In his book, Rage, Bob Woodward wrote an episode about Kim Jong-un. Then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo under the Trump administration asked Kim Jong-un, the South Koreans told us that you have intent to denuclearize. Is that true? To that, Kim answered, I'm a father and I don't want my kids to carry nuclear weapons on their backs the rest of their lives. Kim has also emphasized that the nuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is a dying instruction of his late grandfather Kim Il-sung and his late father Kim Jong-il. Shown on the screen, North Korea agreed with the U.S. on denuclearization on various occasions, but the agreements failed to be followed through. Two Koreas have agreed to work together on denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, reconciliation and cooperation, and peace and reunification on occasions. I believe that the Koreas should try to implement the agreement together for the Korean Peninsula free from threats of a war. The two Koreas should be engaged in talks again. North Korea should go back to the negotiating table with the U.S. No strings attached. There's a growing call for nuclear armament within South Korea. However, it is dangerous and undesirable for South Korea to lose sight of the ultimate goal of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula take its own nuclear arsenals instead. It will sour the ROK-US relations and trigger nuclear arms race in the region. The only viable option for peace on Peninsula, in the greater region, is diplomatic negotiations with North Korea, based on a realistic and pragmatic approach. When Peninsula was divided in half by decisions of our relations, regardless of Korean people's own will, and through atrocities of war, and have since remained divided. The two Koreas have been technically at war the past 70 years. It is true that the peace zone and the nuclearization of the Korean Peninsula took a step back due to the failed US-DRK talks and tensions. However, the Korean Peninsula in Northeast Asia could not be reset confrontation, crisis of war, and nuclear threat and war. All relevant parties need to join a journey in nuclearization of peace on the peninsula. In particular, the U.S. needs to take immediate actions. The Biden administration reaffirmed commitment to complete denuclearization of Korean Peninsula in the context which forward for within South Korea. And it did so at the U.S.-Japan summit this January as well. This point in time, it is hard to earn full trust with empty promises not backed by concrete actions. The U.S. should not further defer actions towards the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your patience to endure my full English for a long time. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that illuminating talk. I think this is very timely talk in the sense that North Korea continues to provoke and launch missiles. So I think it was very insightful. We have many, many questions. I know there are many questions from the audience, but also on Zoom, we already received 30 questions. So without further ado, I'll reserve my questions till the end, but I don't think I'll have time to ask my own questions, which is fine. So I'll just move on with the questions. So I'll take turns. I'll ask, I'll take questions from the floor and then go to Zoom and I'll kind of go back and forth. All right, and this is an academic institution, and I know many students are here, so please feel free to raise your hand. I'll give priority to students. So this is a privilege of being an academic institution, higher ed, right? All right, any questions?
Prime Minister, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for speaking to us. My name is Chris Park. I'm affiliated with the Korea Studies, also with GW Studies, Korea Studies Department. My question is regarding the last points you made about South Korea's potential nuclear acquisition. Do you have concerns about the United States assurances to South Korea for its nuclear umbrella? Do you have concerns about nuclear deterrence against North Korea? And I guess second related question is, what should the United States be doing to expand nuclear assurances to South Korea to strengthen nuclear deterrence against North Korea? Thank you.
지금 질문하신 내용이요. 지금 한국에서 자체적으로 이제 핵무장을 하고자 하는 그런 움직임에 대해서 어떤 우려를 가지고 계신지, 혹시 지금 생각을 하시기에 미국에서 제공을 하는 핵무장에 대한 어떤 확실성, 보장성, 그리고 핵 억제에 대한 어떤 탄탄한 공감이 조금 부족하다고 생각을 하셔서 그런 우려가 한국에 있다고 생각을 하시는지, 두 번째로는 이러한 핵 억제를 좀 더 강화하기 위해서 미국에서는 어떤 식의 활동을 더 하면 좋을지에 대한 그런 의견을 물어보셨습니다.
한국에서 핵무장론이 나오고 그런 주장이 점점하는 배경이 몇 가지 있을 거라 생각합니다. 저는 조금 전에 강연에서 제가 말씀드린 것처럼 미국과 북한 사이에 비핵화를 위한 협상이 몇 차례 있었지만 그게 성공하지 못했다는 것, 나는 핵무장으로 질주했다는 것에 대한 불만 또는 불안감이 기본적으로 있습니다. 그리고 미국의 확장 억제 대한 더 확실한 믿음을 갖고 싶은 국민들의 마음이 인정하고 정도로 나타납니다.
So I believe there might be several different reasons why there's a growing call amongst the Koreans that we need to arm ourselves with nuclear weapons. First would be, as I mentioned during my lecture towards the end part of it, U.S. and DPRK, they engaged in multiple talks to denuclearization of Korean Peninsula, but that did not succeed. And then North Korea ended up being proclaiming itself as a nuclear state, which caused anxiety and somewhat of a dissatisfaction amongst the Korean population. The second one is, I think Korean people needs more certainty towards U.S.'s extended deterrence. That's why they wanted to have this sort of, desire that we have our own nuclear weapons.
현상에 대해서 미국은 확장 억제의 약속을 한 국민들이 확실히 신뢰할 수 있도록 하는 조치를 취하는 것이 옳다고 생각합니다. 한국의 정치인들께 제가 싶은 것은 이 결론을 미리 내놓고 그걸 가지고 선언을 막 언쟁을 벌이는 경향이 한국에 있습니다만 그러지 말고 여러 가지 경우에 대비한 로드맵을 준비해 가는 것, 미국이 그에 대해서 어떻게 생각할 것인가 하는 것을 끊임없이 타진해 가면서 어떤 의미에서는 물밑에서 미국과 함께 홍보 로드맵을 준비해 가는 것이 지금 필요한 것이다 생각을 합니다. 지금처럼 아무런 준비 없이 결론만 가지고서 논쟁하는 것은 되지 않을 것이다.
So under this background, I believe U.S. needs to act and take measures in a way that it can give more trust to the Korean people about its commitment for extended deterrence. And also to the Korean politicians, I would like to speak to them that there's a tendency amongst the political circle in Korea that they sort of like set on the conclusion first and just debate on it like constantly, but I don't think that's really productive or useful. Rather, they need to have some sort of roadmap based on various different scenarios. And Korean political circle needs to work with the U.S. as to what U.S. believes is, desirable, and they need to keep working with it behind the scenes to have some sort of security roadmap that's agreed upon by the two parties. Just like this, without proper preparation and just setting on one conclusion and just keep debating on it is not really productive, in my opinion.
All right. Thank you. We'll take one question from Zoom. Question from Jonathan Kerala. China wants to prevent too much change in North Korea because North Korea is a buffer state, and the U.S. wants to have many soldiers and missile systems in the Western Pacific to contain China. How is it possible for inter-Korean relations to become peaceful, and how can the Korean Peninsula denuclearize and the U.S.-China rivalry continues?
지금 이제 하신 질문은 중국 같은 경우에는 북한에 너무나 많은 변화가 갑작스럽게 일어나는 것을 원하지 않는데 이것은 이제 중국이 북한을 하나의 완충국가라고 보기 때문에 너무 급변하는 그런 사태를 북한에서는 원하지 않는다. 그리고 지금 미국에서도 중국에 어떤 이제 대항하기 위해서 이 서태평양 지역에서의 어떤 긴장이라든지 이런 부분, 대치하는 그런 부분들이 생기고 있는데 이런 상황에서 즉 미국과 중국 간의 이런 경제 구도가 계속 증가하는 이런 상황에서 어떻게 남북 관계가 더 평화로워질 수가 있고 한반도의 비핵화라는 것이 어떻게 가능할 것이다라고 생각하시는지에 대한 의견을 듣고 싶습니다.
우선 중국은 2차 북한 핵 위기 때 국제회담이라는 대화의 틀을 만들고 국제회담에서 2005년과 2007년에 두 차례 합의를 내는데 중국이 상당히 건설적인 역할을 했었습니다. 그러나 그 후에 어떤 역할을 했는가에 대해서 친하지 못합니다. 만에 하나라도 한반도 평화나 북한의 핵무장을 중국이 미국과의 경쟁에서 의 유불리라는 관점에서 바라보지 않기를 바랍니다. 중국이 지도국가를 지향하고 있다면 동아시아 지역의 안정과 평화를 위해서 중국이 노력하는 것은 지도국가가 되려는 국가로서의 당연한 의무야 하나라고 생각합니다. 더구나 상식적으로 볼 때 인접하고 있는 나라의 핵무장이 반가울 리가 없지 않습니까? 중국이 지도국가가 아니라 북한의 이웃국가로서도 핵무장은 제지하는 것이 옳다고 생각합니다. 미국으로서는 북한, 중국, 러시아의 연대 움직임에 대처해서 한중일 공조를 강조하고 한중일 공조를 강화하려고 하는 것은 충분히 옳은 방향인데, 그러나 미국이나 중국이 한반도를 미중 경쟁의 최전선으로 만들려고 하지는 말았으면 좋겠다 하는 것을 주문해 드리고 싶습니다. 한반도는 7천만 명 이상의 사람이 살고 있는 곳입니다. 그것이 평화롭게 살아갈 수 있도록 도와주는 것이 이 나라들의 도리이지, 다른 어떤 목적을 위한 최전선 긴장을 고조시키는 것은 그 나라들이 할 것이라고 생각합니다.
After the second nuclear crisis in North Korea, China actually played a pretty constructive role through six-party talks. Through the six-party talks, as I mentioned during my lecture, they produced two agreements both in 2005 and 2007, and I believe China's role was pretty significant in that result. But however, after that six-party talks, I'm not quite sure what sort of constructive role China was playing in this dynamic. So if China is somehow trying to use this Korean Peninsula situation, the peace on the Korean Peninsula and the nuclear armament by North Korea as some sort of tool to advance its own national interests against the US, then I don't think that's the right way for China to go to become the true global leader country. Rather, it should pursue more of the stability and peace in the Northeast Asia, and I think that's the proper obligation that China carries as a big nation. And also, not just as a leader country in the world, as a country right adjacent to North Korea, it cannot be a happy situation for China that North Korea is trying to arm itself with nuclear weapons. So it needs to kind of think about that piece of puzzle as well. So once again, China, I think, should try to help more of the promoting peace in the Korean Peninsula and the region. And also, we should not forget that Korea is a home to about 70 million people. China needs to remember that when it thinks about its national interest, and I hope that they don't turn Korean Peninsula into some sort of front line just to fight against their strategic interest between the U.S. and China. That's what I believe.
봄전 강연에서 전 미국을 향해서 한국과 외교 관계를 수립하도록 제안했습니다. 미국 속담에 듣는 것이 안 하는 것보다 낫다. Better late than never가 있는 줄 압니다. 지금이라도 미국이 북한과 수교를 하면 이중 경쟁에서도 게임 체인저 역할을 할 수가 있을 것이다 라고 생각을 합니다. 제대전 이후에 미국은 늘 실용적이고 현실주의적인 대외 정책으로 세계 질서를 바꾸곤 해왔습니다. 이 제대전 직후에는 적국으로 맞서 싸웠던 독일과 일본을 도와서 소련의 팽창을 저지하게 했습니다. 트루만 대통령의 마셜 플랜이 그것이었죠. 닉슨 대통령은 적성국 중국과 접근해서 소련을 견제하는데 도움을 받았습니다. 클린턴 대통령, 미국에게 참담한 패배를 안겨주었던 베트남과 수교에서 베트남을 우호국가로 돌려놨습니다. 그리고 오바마 대통령, 투바와 수교였고 이란 핵협상을 타결했지 않습니까? 이런 자랑스러운 경험을 우리는 가지고 있습니다. 지금 미국이 북한과 수교하지 못할 이유와 수교한다 그러면 반드시 미중 경쟁에 새로운 국면이 조성될 수 있을 것이다 라고 생각을 하는 것이 한반도 평화를 위해서도 도움이 될 것이라고 믿습니다.
And also, I suggested and proposed during my lecture that U.S. should try to establish diplomatic relations with North Korea. And as the U.S. aim goes, it's better late than never. So if it works on having some sort of diplomatic ties with North Korea, I think this can serve as some sort of game changer for U.S. to have its carry its relations against China. So after World War II, U.S. took a very pragmatic and realistic approach in terms of its foreign policy, and it was able to change the global order that way. So after the World War II, U.S. was actually helping Germany and Japan, which was fighting against during the war, to somewhat deter the expansion of the Soviet Union. I call that Marshall Plan by President Truman. And also President Nixon was approaching China, which was its rogue country, to check Soviet Union under control by the US. And President Clinton was able to establish a relations with Vietnam, which wasn't really its friendly nation, but it was able to turn Vietnam into its friendly ally. And President Obama was reaching out to Cuba and had diplomatic relations with it, and was able to conclude a deal with Iran in terms of its nuclear negotiations as well. So as you can see, U.S. has very many of these proud experiences of carrying this very pragmatic and realistic foreign policy. So I don't think there is any reason for U.S. not to be able to establish similar relations with North Korea at this point. And if it can, I think that will open a very new phase in terms of its strategic competition with China, and it will also bring a new momentum for the peace on the Korean Peninsula as well.
Next question, yes.
I'm Danny Leipzig. I'm a professor in the business school. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your interesting talk. I agree very much that it's useful to look at the missteps. But my question really has to do with if you're a Korean citizen today and you look at the case of Taiwan, you look at the case of Korea, will the U.S. risk cities in California to defend either Taiwan or Seoul? And if there's some doubt, then I think the citizens that are saying that Korea should have its own nuclear capacity may not be entirely wrong. And I think that's what the polls show. So I was struck in your talk that out of the 30 slides, there was very little about inside Korea. It was all about U.S., North Korea, U.S., North Korea. And I understand why, but I think I'd like to hear your views a bit more on what's happening inside Korea, because I think that's something to consider.
예, 지금 이제 질문을 좀 하고 싶은 것은 한국 내 어떤 대중적인 여론이라든지 분위기에 대한 부분을 조금 더 여쭙고 싶다라고 말씀을 하셨어요. 이제 강연을 보면은 많은 부분이 이제 미국이나 북한에 관련된 부분에 많이 집중이 되어 있었지, 이 대한민국 국민들의 어떤 내부적인 분위기나 여론에 대한 부분이 크게 나오지 않았기 때문에 이제 여쭤보는 것인데, 예를 들어 이제 대만도 마찬가지고 한국도 마찬가지지만, 만약에 미국이 대만이나 한국을 방어하기 위해서 뭐 서해안에 있는 태평양에 있는 이런 도시들을 뭐 피해를 입을 것을 감수해 가면서까지 한국과 대만을 확실히 방어해 줄 것이다라는 어떤 뭐 확약과 같은 그런 확실함이 없다라고 하면, 사실 한국이나 대만에서도 미국의 이런 확장 억제에 대한 어떤 헌신이라든지 약속에 대해서 의구심을 가지는 게 그렇게 잘못된 부분이라고만은 생각이 안 든다는 거죠. 이 사람들이 그런 의구심을 풀 수 있는 게 당연한 거고, 여론조사에서도 아마 그렇기 때문에 그런 정서가 반영이 되었다라고 보는데, 그 한국 내 여론에 대해서 많은 이야기를 하시지 못한 부분은 왜 그런지 이유는 충분히 좀 이해를 하겠지만, 개인적으로는 그런 여론에 대한 부분이 좀 궁금하다. 한국 내부적인 어떤 분위기나 여론이 좀 궁금하다라고 질문하셨습니다.
네, 조금 전 질문에 대한 답변에서도 약간 언급이 됐다고 생각합니다만, 지난 30년 동안 간헐적으로 미국과 북한 사이에 비핵화 협상이 있었지만 그것이 아무도 성공하지 못했다는 데 대한 한국민들의 좌절감, 절감 같은 게 있을 겁니다. 그리고 북한의 핵능력이 강화되면서 오늘 질문자가 말씀 주신 것처럼 미국의 서해안이 공격당하더라도 동아시아의 우방을 도울 수 있을 것인가 라는 질문을 한국 국민들도 하게 됐다고 생각합니다. 그것이 자체 핵무장론의 배경이 되고 있는 것은 사실입니다. 또 하나의 배경, 왜 작년 금년 사이에 갑자기 핵무장론이 보조됐는가 라는 제일 큰 이유는 한국의 정권 교체에 있다고 생각합니다. 정부가 어떤 정책을 추구하느냐, 무엇을 강조하느냐에 따라서 국민이나 언론에 영향을 주는 것이 영향의 하나로서 자체 핵무장론이 아예 없었던 것이 나왔던 것이 아니라 덮여져 있던 것이 격출하게 됐다고 생각합니다.
I mentioned this briefly during my lecture, but over the past 30-something years, U.S. and DPRK engaged in multiple negotiations, rounds of negotiations towards nuclear denuclearization intermittently. However, none of those negotiations were successful. That sort of gave Korean people some sort of like despair, saying, what's the whole point of having these multiple talks when it's not going to produce anything? So as North Korea is improving and promoting its nuclear capabilities, as we mentioned that like people are sort of doubting whether U.S. will be able and willing to protect its East Asian allies like Taiwan and South Korea, even if it risks hurting its own West Coast cities. So that question is also posed by Korean people as well recently, and I think that gave rise to this self-nuclear armament sort of opinion amongst the South Korean population. And also another reason I think of this very rapid rise of nuclear armament amongst the Korean people last year and this year is because of the change in administrations. So because of the new policies and emphasis that the new government is putting on, that is influencing the public opinion and what media is reporting. So I don't think this nuclear armament opinion among South Koreans I don't think it was not existent before. It was somewhat hidden and covered, but now because of the new administration, they're coming out more. They're voicing that opinion more.
제가 오늘 강연뿐만 아니라 다른 기회에도 한국 내의 문제에 대해서는 언급을 자제해야 했습니다. 제일 큰 이유는 미국에 있기 때문입니다. 한국 국내 문제를 말하고 싶었다면 여기 오지 않고 서구에 있었을 것입니다.
And as you mentioned, and I'm sure you're right about why I was sort of not mentioning too much about what's going on inside South Korea. That's because I'm here in the U.S. talking about South Korea. If I have to talk about South Korean issues and its public sentiment, then I should be in South Korea. But because I'm here, I'd rather talk about the settings here rather than the internal South Korean matters.
Okay, thank you. We'll take another question from Zoom, from Josephine Kim. Can you highlight international legal and environmental challenges related to a peaceful denuclearization? Legal and environmental challenges.
그래서 이제 평화적으로 비핵화를 하는 부분에 있어서 뭐 국제적, 법적인 부분, 환경적인 측면에서 어떤 뭐 문제들이 있을 수 있다라고 생각을 하시는지 질문하셨습니다.
네, 그 질문의 뜻을 제가 정확하게 파악했는지 모르겠습니다만, 최근의 보도에 따르면 북한의 핵실험이 그 핵시설 주변의 환경에 영향을 주고 있다 했습니다. 이상한 버섯이 나오기 시작했다. 버섯이 수출되고 있는 것 같다. 보도를 제가 봤습니다. 환경이라고 언급하시는 건 그런 말씀하시는지 대단히 우려스러운 일이라고 생각합니다. 그리고
법적인 부분.
북한이 핵을 하지 않았을 때와 정확한 상태의 소량의 핵을 가졌을 때와 지금은 협상의 내용이 달라질 수 있다. 그렇기 때문에 적극적인 대화의 재개가 더 절실합니다. 시간이 가면 갈수록 올려놓기는 점점 더 어려워지는 것이니까요. 그래서 더 늦기 전에 미국이 빨리 북한과 대화를 해야 한다 생각을 합니다. 미국한테 요구한 것 같습니다만 사실은 2017년 문재인 대통령과 트럼프 대통령 사이의 한미 정상회담 뒤에 발표된 한미 공동선언 북한 핵 문제는 미국이 주도하는 것으로 이미 합의를 했었습니다. 명시적으로 미국 주도라고 써지는 않았지만 국제적인 문제라는 인식이 공동선언에 국제 문제라는 것은 미국이 주도한다는 뜻으로 해석이 됐었습니다. 그리고 핵 문제가 아닌 일반적인 남북관계, 공동성명은 평화 통일을 위한 환경 조성이라는 등의 표현을 썼습니다만 그것에 대해서는 한국이 주도적인 역할을 하는 것을 미국도 지지했다. 이런 표현을 쓰고 있습니다. 말하자면 북한 핵 문제와 그 이외의 남북관계는 주도적인 역할을 누가 하느냐가 별도로 규정되어 있었다. 그것이 2017년 얘기입니다. 그런 것으로 봐서 예전에도 그랬고 지금까지도 핵 문제는 미국이 주도하는 것으로 되어 있기 때문에 더 늦기 전에 행동해야 된다라고 보는 것입니다. 특히 조금 전에 제가 미국 4명의 대통령 재임 중에 있었던 미북한 간 교섭 얘기를 했는데 그중에 한 명은 사례가 하나도 등장하지 않았을 겁니다. 버락 오바마 대통령 시절에 뭘 했을까는 전혀 제가 언급 안 했어요. 나머지 3분 대통령 시절의 얘기는 제가 언급했습니다만 그것은 거의 아무 일도 하지 않았기 때문이었습니다. 그런데 그 현상이 지금 다시 나타나려고 하고 있다. 이것을 저는 굉장히 우려하고 있습니다.
So on that quite sure whether I got your question down, but regarding the environmental aspect, I heard and I saw from media report that the nuclear facilities in North Korea where they did the nuclear test had some negative environmental effect, and they're having these somewhat contaminated mushrooms growing in the area and they're exporting it, which is quite concerning. And in terms of legal aspect of the unification and denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, compared to North Korea, was not confirmed to have any nuclear weapons. Now that it confirmed that it has at least some amount of nuclear weapon, I think we need to approach our negotiations differently. We need to talk about different things than when we didn't know that North Korea ever had any nuclear weapons in its possession. So that's why we need to engage North Korea in talks ever more than before. And it's just going to be harder to reverse the situation if we sit on it. The time's going to make it difficult. The time's basically not on our side, so we need to work on it fast. And then U.S. needs to work on it fast. I feel sorry that I keep pushing U.S. to do something on it, but there's a reason, because like back in 2017, when President Moon Jae-in and President Trump had a summit meeting, they produced a joint statement, and they said North Korean nuclear matter should be somewhat dealt with under the leadership of the United States. Although it was not clearly written that way in the statement, they dealt with North Korean nuclear matter in the statement as an international matter. That's why they believe the U.S. should take the lead, and that matter should be U.S.-led. But in terms of other North-South matters outside of nuclear weapons in North Korea, such as creating conducive environment for the peace on the Korean Peninsula, in the statement they mentioned that should be Korea-led and U.S. should support, because that's that's what's going to work better. So they have somewhat different assumption on which side should take the lead in different types of matter, whether it's North Korean nuclear matter or not. So that was back in 2017. That's why, even now, I think that's why U.S. should somewhat of leadership in addressing the North Korean nuclear matter before it becomes too late. And I mentioned during my lecture that there are various actions taken under several different U.S. presidents in terms of the negotiations with DPRK on its denuclearization. But you probably remember nothing was really said about President Obama, because during that period, nothing was basically done. And I'm just worried that that tendency is trying to come back under this administration, which is concerning.
I think we'll go to this side.
Hi, I'm Elias. I am an undergraduate student here in the Korean program at GW. My question is about instead of this typically more top-down approach, a more bottom-up approach to the North Korea problem. So I know there's coming specifically from governments, the US, North Korea, South Korea governments, there is a lot of tension that is passed down to the citizens. And so because of that, we have this nuclearization issue and we have the issue of escalation. How can, maybe through exchange programs like the ones that I participated in, going back and forth between South Korea and the US, that allow for the US and South Korea to have a stronger diplomatic bond, how can that be applied to the North Korea issue?
지금 이제 질문하신 내용은 이런 문제를 우리가 접근하는 그런 측면에 있어서 지금 상당히 많은 부분을 탑다운 방식으로 지금 얘기를 하고 있는데, 그보다는 조금 더 건설적인 방식으로서 바텀업으로 이런 문제를 접근을 하면 해결이 쉬울 수 있지 않을까라는 그런 이제 생각을 하신다고 하시면서, 지금 보면은 미국, 북한, 한국 정부들 간에 굉장히 많은 긴장 상태, 좀 텐션이 있는 것이 사실이고, 이런 긴장 상태가 그대로 국민들한테 지금 전이가 되고 있다. 그런 부분 때문에 대한민국 내에서도 한국장문이 일게 되는 그런 이유가 되지 않았을까라고 생각을 하고 이런 문제를 해결하는 부분에 있어서 이제 본인도 참여를 하셨다고 하는데 한미 간의 뭐 교육 프로그램이라든지 이런 민간 차원에서 조금 교류를 하고 더 이해를 하는 이런 식의 어떤 프로그램이 있다라면 도움이 될 것 같고 이런 문제를 북한 문제를 해결하는 데 적용을 해보면 좋지 않을까라는 그런 생각을 하신다라고 하셨습니다. 어떻게 생각하시는지?
네, 기본적으로 동의합니다. 반은 그 체제의 특성 때문에 가까운 방식을 선호할 수 있다고 생각합니다. 아니, 이외의 나라들은 정부의 시스템이 확립되어 있기 때문에 가까운만으로는 충분하지 않습니다. 2018년 6월 싱가포르, 2019년 2월 해노이에서의 트럼프 김정은 회담이 맨 처음에는 상당히 빨리 진전되는 것 같다가 결국은 좌초하고 만 것은 가까운 뿐이었기 때문입니다. 바텀업으로 받쳐주지 않았기 때문에 그렇게 쉽게 무너졌다고 생각합니다. 그런 다른 요인도 있습니다만 질문 주신 탑다운과 바텀업의 관계에 북한에서 말씀드리면 그렇습니다. 그리고 특히 한국은 한국과 달라서 물론 최고 지도자의 의지가 큰 영향을 미치지만 결국 전체를 움직이는 것은 정부 조직이기 때문에 바텀업과 탑다운이 서로 조응해야 함께 손을 마주쳐야 효과가 나타날 것이다. 틀림없는 말씀입니다. 그리고 민간 차원의 프로그램 굉장히 아쉽게 생각합니다. 한국 오래전부터 공공외교 강화를 말하고 있습니다만 실제로는 기대만큼 충분히 이루어지지 못했습니다. 그런데 정부에만 맡겨놓지 말고 미국에는 여러 종류의 싱크탱크들이 굉장히 활발하기 때문에 미국이 좀 더 많은 노력을 기울여서 정부도 노력하고 민간들도 더 그 노력을 독촉해서 미국과의 민간 차원의 연구, 공동연구 토론 같은 것이 훨씬 더 활발해질 필요가 있다라고 생각합니다. 최근에 미국에서 한국의 행정론에 대해서 미국 정부는 반대 입장을 분명히 했습니다만 싱크탱크 한 곳에서는 검토할 만하다는 의견을 낸 적이 있습니다. 그런 다양한 의견들이 나오면서 관심을 환기하고 미국에서 좀 더 깊게 한국의 고민에 대해서 연구하고 또 정책 담당자들도 그걸 같이 연구하는 그런 좋은 영향을 줄 수 있다고 생각합니다. 그 방향이 옳다는 것이 아니라 그런 활동은 매우 중요한 역할을 할 것이다.
I basically agree with the opinion on that bottom-up approach or civilian exchanges going to be very helpful. Because of the North Korean regime's characteristic, it might prefer some top-down approaches, but outside of North Korea, other countries already have a very well-set governance system. So just approaching North Korean issue through this top-down aspect or lens would not be sufficient. So back in 2018 and 2019, US and DPRK had a summit, once in Singapore and in Hanoi, and it looked like it was going pretty well, rapidly advancing in the beginning, but it fell through pretty quickly. And I believe the reason was because there was only top-down approaches for those engagement, not there's any support from the bottom-up sort of aspects. And also not just North Korea might be different, but to advance these national agenda, of course, the willingness of the top leader is very important, but government system, government organizations needs to work towards it as well to make it successful. So in other words, there should be some collaboration between top-down approach and the bottom-up approach. Otherwise, it's going to be very empty. And also on the civilian programs, exchange programs, and etc., although South Korean government has been emphasizing on its public diplomacy efforts, I don't think it was really that fruitful so far. So I think we need to work more with different aspects of the U.S. society, not just the government, but there are a lot of think tanks in here. And then there's a very strong Korean civil society. So they need to have more interaction between themselves, not just with a government organization. So have some joint research, joint discussions, and that can breed or, engender various opinions. And that can sort of renew the interest in the Korean issue, and that can produce very positive results. Because recently about the Korean public's opinion about we need to arm ourselves with weapons, although most of the US government and most of the US people are against it, there was one think tank I remember which was somewhat positive about it, and then maybe we should look at it differently. I don't believe that's the right direction, but because of this very active discussion and debates, I think it's producing very positive results in terms of this issue. So I think we need to approach our issue this way, more broad, more open sort of manner.
If you can give advice as to what our institute can do or contribute more, I guess while you're here, it'd be great. We'll try our best. Okay, we'll take one question from Zoom, from Sunjae Oh. What do you see as the biggest obstacle or barrier between Washington and Seoul when it comes to having a shared understanding of threats as well as opportunities vis-a-vis Pyongyang?
북한과 관련해서 이제 또 위협이라는 요인들도 있을 거고 기회라는 요인들도 있을 텐데 이런 의견에 있어서 합치를 보는 것과 관련을 해서 한국과 미국 사이에 이런 의견의 합의를 보는 데 있어서 어떤 장애물이 있다라고 생각을 하시는지 좀 궁금하다고 하셨거든요.
네. 관심의 정도가 많이 다르죠. 제가 작년 6월 7일에 여기 와서 이제 9개월이 됩니다만 제일 무력감, 헬플리스 하고 느끼는 것은 미국 행정부에 과연 한반도에 대한 관심이 있기는 하는 것일까 라는 것이었습니다. 이중 경쟁, 매나 국제 전쟁으로 가득 차 있는 데요. 그리고 그런 미국의 관리들도 보았지만 한반도 정책에 안에서 뭘 하고 있는지 잘 보이지 않는 이것이 한국으로서는 굉장히 안타까운 일입니다. 바이든 행정부 출범 초기에 기존의 북한 정책을 재검토하겠다고 했는데 지금도 재검토만 하고 있는 것인지 2년 동안 뭘 했는 것인지 잘 보이지가 않습니다. 미국이 국제적인 지도력을 유지하고 싶겠지만 동맹의 자발적 문제에 대해서 소극적으로 대처하고 관심이 저하되면서 국제적 리더십을 유지하기 무게를 양립하기는 쉽지 않을 것입니다. 그 점에 대해서 생각.
I think the biggest problem is the difference in level of interest in this matter. So I came here last June, like June 7th to be exact, and it's been about 9 months. And the time that I felt the most helpless about the issue was when I came to the realization whether U.S. administration is actually interested in the South Korean matter at all. So right now, of course, there are a lot on the U.S.'s plate because the strategic competition with China and there's a war in Ukraine, etc. But still, I had an opportunity to meet with government officials several times, but I was just wondering and doubting myself more about like what sort of Korean policies they have in their mind and what sort of implementation they're doing in terms of Korean policy. So that sort of like left me somewhat like needing and desiring more on this matter. And with the inauguration of the Biden administration, it said that it'll re-review the North Korean policy that it inherited from the previous administration. But I'm not sure whether it's just still reviewing the policy or like what or not. Like what it did over the past 2 years, because I didn't really see any good results. So that's the biggest problem. And I understand that U.S. wants to maintain its international leadership in the international stage, but if it is sort of belittling the problems, which is a life and death sort of problem for its own ally, and it's being a little bit more passive or lowering its interest level in it, I'm not sure whether it can still maintain the international leadership that it's coveting in the international stage. So that I think U.S. might do better on.
I think we'll take questions from that side. Yes? The back?
Thank you for your speech. I'm from Taiwan and I used to work in legislative branch. I'm the first year student in GW. I just want to ask because Prime Minister have a lot of experience in Japan. So what's the role Japan can play in the Korea Peninsula, and also the trilateral cooperations can intensify or just decrease the tension in the Korea Peninsula. Thank you.
네, 이제 대만 입법부에 계셨던 분이라고 하시는데, 그 총리님께서 이전에 일본과 관련한 경험이 많으셔서 그 부분에 대한 질문을 좀 하고 싶다라고 하셨고요. 일본이 한반도 문제에 있어서 어떤 역할을 할 수 있다라고 생각을 하시는지, 그리고 이제 한미일 간의 삼각공조라든지 협력과 같은 부분들에 대한 이야기가 많이 나오는데, 이런 것들이 한반도 내 긴장을 보조시킬 수 있다고 생각을 하시는지, 아니면 오히려 낮출 수 있다고 생각을 하시는지 좀 의견을 듣고 싶습니다.
중국이 경제력과 함께 군사력을 키우고 있고, 그걸 통해서 국제적 영향력을 위해서 노력하고 있습니다. 북한은 중국에 대한 의존이 심화되고 있고, 러시아도 삼각연대 포함되어 있습니다만, 그런 상황에서 한미일 3국이 공조를 강화하는 것은 불가피하다 생각이 듭니다. 단지 일본에 대해서 우정에 충고를 하자면 한반도 평화를 위해서 한 국민의 입장에서 우방답게 도와주길 바란다. 이 말씀을 꼭 드리고 싶습니다. 얼마 전에 일본인 전문가와 미국인 전문가 함께 쓴 논문을 본 적이 있습니다. 여기 보면 이 한반도 비핵화나 평화가 진전되면 제가 오늘 강연에서 언급한 바와 같이 주한미군의 존재, 또는 한미동맹의 역할을 수행할 수도 있다. 하고 주장하는 걸 제가 봤습니다. 많이 놀랐습니다. 북한에 살고 있는 7천만 민족의 생존이나 평화가 다른 것이 우선한다고 그러는 것인가? 그러지 않았으면 좋겠다. 존 볼튼 회고록을 한국에서도 100% 신뢰하는 것은 아니었습니다만, 그 회고록에 따르면 북한 간의 관계 개선무역, 혹은 북한과 미국의 관계 개선무역, 있을 경우는 꼭 일본 측이 뭔가 부정적인 영향을 미칠 만한 일을 하는 것이 묘사되고 있습니다. 진정한 이웃나라답게 평화를 위해서 진심으로 도와달라 하는 그리고 싶습니다. 있습니다.
So as you all know, China is growing its political clout and military clout, and with that is trying to increase its international influence. And North Korea's dependence on China is growing, and Russia is part of this North Korea's like three tripartite alliance with North Korea, with China and Russia. That's all part of its network. So against this backdrop, I think it's inevitable for three countries, Korea, Japan, and the US, to strengthen its cooperation and collaboration. But if I may offer a word of advice to Japan, if it thinks it's our ally, I hope that it can help us as a proper ally, thinking our situation from the perspective of the Korean people. So I recently saw some pieces co-authored by a Japanese and American expert, and it mentioned in the thesis that if there's an advance in the peace on the Korean Peninsula and denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, it might actually weaken the status of the U.S. forces in Korea and rock U.S. alliance, which was pretty surprising to me. I wasn't sure what's the intent behind it, but I was like, well, do they think there's something more important than the lives and livelihood of the 70 million people living in North Korea and South Korea? So that was somewhat of a shock to me. And although I'm not 100% trusting the what's written in John Bolton's memoir, but if you look at his book, whenever there is a movement of some good movement towards the improved relations between the two Koreas and improved relations between North Korea and the United States, there's always something that Japan does, somewhat negatively affecting that good mood. So I would just like to ask Japan to help us achieve this peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula with the help of Japan, which is our good neighbor. So I hope Japan can do its good role as a good neighbor.
Okay, we're almost out of time. I think we'll just take one last question. I know there's still many hands up. So I think we'll take maybe two or three questions at the same time, and then we'll ask Prime Minister Lee to answer. Okay, we'll start with.
Hello, my name is Young Kim. I was born in America, but since I have citizenship in Korea, I also went to the military of Republic of Korea. And inside the military during my term, I never thought there would be a war in the 21st century. But unfortunately, the Ukraine and Russia war have happened. When there's a high possibility, and there are some papers about China having attacks on Taiwan in the future. And I have some concerns about self-defense in Republic of Korea as well, because there are some communist countries that are around the Korean Peninsula. So first of all, I want to ask former Prime Minister, are there any chances that there will be some threats if we don't have the Korea-US alliance or weapons such as the THAAD inside the Korean Peninsula?
From this side, yes, looking at the back.
네, 오늘 말씀 잘 들었습니다. 오늘 강연을 시작으로 필라델피아, 뉴욕, 휴스턴 등 이달에 강연을 하실 예정으로 알고 있는데 혹시 본격적인 정치 행보를 재개하신 걸로 해석을 해도 되겠습니까?
Could you please identify yourself?
Geo Park, JTC.
Okay, one last question.
Hello, thank you so much for being here. It's Such an honor to have you here today. Thank you so much for speaking to us. My name is Sua Cho. I'm a student at Yale School. I think when it comes to North Korea, the two main issues that we talk about is nuclear weapons and humanitarian assistance. My question to you is, what role should what role should humanitarian assistance play in this roadmap that we create in order to obtain denuclearization in this area?
Just one last question, because I don't want to leave out people on Zoom. So there were several questions related to ending the Korean War. So there were questions such as why it didn't really work out under Moon administration. So that would be the last question.
질문이 지금 네 가지가 있는데요. 제일 처음에 이제 질문하셨던 분은 미국에서 태어나셨지만 한국 국적을 계신 분이어서 이제 국내도 직접 가셔서 공부를 하시고 하셨던 분이라고 하는데 뭐 당시에는 21세기 전쟁이 나겠느냐라는 그런 생각을 했었지만 지금 보면은 실제로 러시아가 우크라이나를 침공하는 그런 상태이고 전쟁이 벌어지고 있고 그리고 뭐 이런 상태로 간다라면은 중국에서 대만을 친다라는 것도 정말 가공의 얘기만은 아닐 것 같아요. 그런 가능성이 충분히 있다라고 생각이 이제 되는데 그러면 한국에서 지금 보게 되면 한국의 자위력이라고 할까요? 이런 것들이 지금 한국도 보면은 공산주의 국가들로 이제 둘러싸여 있는 상황이기 때문에 침략을 절대 받지 않는다라는 그런 가능성은 없는 거 아니냐. 예를 들어서 뭐 한미 동맹이 약화가 되거나 뭐 한국 내 사드와 같은 이런 무기가 배치가 되어 있지 않은 상황이라고 한다라면 이런 위기가 정말 어떤 전쟁으로 비유할 수 있는 그런 가능성도 무시할 수 없는 게 아니냐라는 이제 그런 질문을 했고요. 일단 두 번째 질문 같은 경우에는 이제 오늘 강연을 마치시고 나서 들으셨지만, so the second question for the audience, the question was after his lecture here, he has scheduled multiple lectures in Philadelphia, New York, and Houston. So he was wondering whether she can read it as his official resumption of political life. 그리고 이제 세 번째 질문은 지금 보면 이제 북한과 관련해서 많이 나오고 있는 문제가 이제 뭐 비핵화 문제라든지 아니면 인도주의적인 그런 지원과 관련된 부분들이 크게 많이 나오고 있는데 지금 이 북한 문제를 해결하는 부분에 있어서 인도적 지원이라는 측면에서 할 수 있는 역할, 인도적 지원이 이 북한의 상황을 조금 더, 그러니까 이런 국면을 조금 더 낫게 할 수 있는 부분에 있어서 어떤 역할을 할 수 있다고 생각하시는지에 대한 질문을 하셨고요. 그게 세 번째 질문이고, 네 번째 질문은 들으셨겠지만 지금 이제 종전선언과 관련된 이야기가 많이 나오고 있는데, 왜 문재인 정권 때 그렇게 많이 이렇게 푸시를 했음에도 불구하고 종전선언이 이루어지지 못했다라고 생각을 하시는지에 많이 나왔다고 합니다. 그걸 좀 원한다고 하시네요. 요령껏 해주시면 좋겠습니다.
네, 첫 번째, 맞습니다. 냉전이 끝나 전쟁은 없을 거라는 기대가 있었습니다만, 러시아는 우크라이나를 침공해 전쟁은 지금 1년 가까이 계속되고 있습니다. 러시아의 우크라이나 침공에 따른 전쟁은 한랭전 이후의 역사를 어느 쪽으로 바꿔놓을 것인가 하는 시금석이라고 생각을 합니다. 미국 주도로 수립되고 유지되어 왔던 자유주의적 국제 질서를 시험대 위에 올려놓은 것이 러시아의 우크라이나 침공이었을 텐데요. 그 결말이 어떻게 되느냐에 따라서 국제 질서가 심하게 무너지느냐 아니면 가까스로 유지될 수 있느냐가 걸려있다고 생각을 합니다. 만약 전쟁이 잘못된 방향으로 끝나게 된다면 뭐든지 강한 나라가 약한 이웃나라를 침략하는 일들이 더 빈번해질지도 모른다는 우려를 갖게 됩니다. 중국 대만 얘기를 했습니다만 중국이 대만 해협을 군사력으로 현상을 타파하려는 시도를 하지 않으리라 믿고 싶습니다. 현상을 변경한다고 할 때는 대만 주민의 의사가 최우선돼야 생각을 하고 그렇지 못하는 어떠한 현상 변경도 바람직하지 않은 일이다 라고 말씀드리고 싶습니다. 한국에 대해서 말씀해 주셨는데 제가 아까 연설에서도 말씀드린 것처럼 한반도 평화나 비핵화가 다소 후퇴되어 있는 것은 사실입니다. 그래서 만약의 경우에 불행한 일이 생기지 않도록 하기 위해서 미국한테도 빨리 행동을 취하라고 요청드리는 것이고 한국도 평화에 대해서 훨씬 더 예민하게 받아들이고 대처해야 한다는 말씀을 드리고 싶습니다. 두 번째, 지금 오늘 강연 그리고 이 다음에 또 다른 강연이 있는데 그것이 본격적인 정치 재개냐. 사실은 작년 6월 7일에 제가 여기 와서 27일에 등록을 했을 때 바로 그날 군대에 다녀갔었던 디인 학장께서 저를 부르셨어요. 그런데 저희가 여기 입학할 때 조건이 보트를 내거나 강연을 하거나 둘 중에 하나를 선택하게 돼 있거든요. 근데 디인 학장님, 에이러스 학장님께서 저한테는 일부러 불러가지고 넌 공개 강연을 하라고 지시를 했어요. 설마 그 에이러스 학장님이 저의 정치 재개를 종용했다고 보지는 않습니다. 그리고 유펜에서 꽤 오래전에 강연 요청이 있었습니다만은 제가 GW보다 유펜을 먼저 하는 것이 상도위에 어긋난다고 생각합니다. 유펜은 당신들이 원하기로는 2월을 넘기지 않았으면 좋겠다. 그리고 요일로는 화요일, 수요일이 가장 학생들이 많이 올 수 있는 요일이다. 2월은 화요일로 끝나요, 28일이. 그래서 2월 28일로 합시다. 그래서 허겁지겁 GW 강연을 오늘로 잡았습니다. 역시 유펜과 GW가 공모해서 저를 정치판으로 오고 있다고 생각했는 거예요. 그럼 세 번째, 인도적인 지원이나 민간 교류는 언제든지 중요합니다. 그리고 정부에 있는 사람들이 생각하는 것보다 훨씬 더 중요한 역할을 하는 것을 꼭 말씀드리고 싶습니다. 북한에 들어가서 인도적인 활동을 해왔던 코리안 아메리칸 몇 분을 제가 만난 적이 있습니다. 그분들은 코로나19 때문에 북한 여행이 금지되어 있는 것은 몹시 안타깝게 생각하고 있습니다. 그리고 그분들은 바이든 행정부 인도적인 민간 차원의 활동을 위한 그런 활동가들의 북한 방문을 빨리 허락해 주기를 바라고 있습니다. 이게 빨리 재개되었으면 좋겠다라고 생각을 합니다. 북한 간에도 인도적인 지원 그리고 민간의 교류가 매우 중요한데 단지 언제부터 일까요? 북한이 한국의 인도적 지원에 대해서도 조금씩 냉담해지기 시작하고 있습니다. 그것은 북한이 어떤 생각을 갖고 있는지 확실히 모르지만 혹시 한국의 자세가 상대에 대한 충분한 배려를 결하고 있기 때문은 아닐까 하는 것도 한국이 잘못하고 있고 북한이 그걸 따르는 것은 아닙니다. 양쪽 상호적인 책임이 있겠지만 우리가 먼저 생각을 한다면 어떻게 접근해야 되는 것인가 하는 걸 생각을 합니다. 이 자리에서 거듭 말씀드리고 싶은 것은 몇 년째 북한에 들어가지 못하고 미국 내에서 발이 묶여있는 한 활동가를 위한 활동가들 우리 북한 방문을 허락해 주셨으면 좋겠다. 공동선언이 왜 안 됐는가? 당연에서 좀 언급이 있었습니다. 그런 것이 주한미군이나 한미동맹의 약화를 가져올지도 모른다. 라는 생각이 미국 내에 꽤 많이 있는 걸 느꼈습니다. 저는 그럴 필요까지 없지 않나 생각을 합니다만 그것을 설득해내는 데 한국이 성공하는 겁니다.
So on your first question, after the Cold War, as you mentioned, a lot of people thought that there will be no more war in this world, etc. But as you mentioned, the war is going on in Ukraine, and it's been about a year. So on this invasion, unprovoked Russian invasion into Ukraine, depending on how it ends, I think it can really change the course of history in the post-Cold War era. The U.S. was able to establish and somehow maintain its free world, liberalistic global order after the World War II. But however, because of this Ukraine war, its such ability to maintain the global order is put to the test. So depending on what sort of conclusion the war meets, the global order as we know it might just collapse or it can somewhat carry itself on. But I hope that it's not going to end up with a wrong conclusion, because if it does, there might be more higher chances of stronger nations trying to invade weaker nations based on its own very selfish reasons and interests. So I really hope that that doesn't happen. For the China-Taiwan relations, China is doing flexing its military muscles at the Taiwan Straits, and trying to change the status quo like unilaterally. But this is very dangerous. If it wants to change the status quo at the Taiwan Strait, the first and foremost thing that we should consider is what Taiwanese people think. That should be the top priority, not what China believes to think. If not, the change of status quo in the Taiwan Strait cannot be supported by the global community. For the Korean matter, as I mentioned during my lecture, I think the current state of the peace on the Korean Peninsula and denuclearization status, someone took a step back compared to the past. And that's why I kept asking US to making a move, taking some actions, because it might be too late if it just sits on it too much. So we need to work on that way, and we can all kind of work towards it, and we need to all do our own part. And on the second question about my resumption of my political career here, it's a little touchy, but as I mentioned, I got here last year in June 7th, and when I was registering for the course at GW on the 27th of June, I met with Dean, and there were some preconditions that I had to meet to successfully complete the course. There are several options, but for me, the option given to me was make a public lecture, which is today. So I don't think the Dean and GW was pushing me or driving me to resume my political career that way. And about the lecture at UPenn, I was actually asked to give a lecture there a long time ago, even before GW, but because I was a registered student here, I don't think it was a right thing to do for me to go ahead and do the first lecture at UPenn before GW. But what UPenn asked me was they wanted to have my lecture before the end of February, and they wanted a very specific days of the week for the lecture because they were worried about the turnout of the students, so they wanted either Tuesday or Wednesday. And the last day of February is actually Tuesday. So I just picked that day for UPenn lecture, and because as I mentioned, I wanted to do GW lecture first, I had to pick today to give you a lecture here. So I don't think GW and UPenn were sort of like collaborating to push me into my newly revived political career. So I don't think that's a right assumption. And on the third question, about the humanitarian assistance and its role in the Korean Peninsula issue. I think the civilian exchange and humanitarian assistance are a very important factor in the matter. And I think it's actually more important, more significant than what the government thinks and believes. So I met with several Korean American activists who used to go into the North Korea and provide whatever necessary assistance there. But because of the COVID travel restrictions, they were not able to go back to North Korea for a very long time. And they're saying they really hope that Biden administration can give them some permission to go back to the country so that they can do their work. And I also hope that that can be done sooner than later. And also between the South Korea and North Korea, the civilian exchange and humanitarian assistance are very important. But I'm not sure since when, but North Korea seems to be somewhat turning its cold shoulder to South Korean offering of the humanitarian assistance. I don't know exactly why it's that way, but I suspect that there might be some sort of like attitude issue from the South Korean assistance giver. Might be wrong, but from our perspective, we have to like reflect on what we did. So they might not take our attitude or behavior positively. That's why they're somewhat like resistant towards it. So we need to somewhat think about how to approach it more amicably and more considerate towards North Korean the beneficiaries. And for years, these people, as I mentioned, the North Korean activists, the assistance activists were not able to go back into the North Korea, and I really hope that they can go back and do their work too, just like in South Korea and the United States as well. And lastly, on the end of war declaration, I briefly mentioned on it during my lecture, but there's some idea amongst the U.S. population that this free mood on the Korean Peninsula, the peace and denuclearization, the advancement in those matters might weaken the status of the U.S. forces in Korea and rock U.S. alliance. I don't really believe so, and I hope that they can change their mind. But obviously, Korea was not successful in persuading those people that that's not the correct way to see the situation.
Wow. Thank you so much. I mean, we went way beyond our event time. We normally don't do this. I think this is like first time that we went beyond 90 minutes. And this shows how much we were engaged in this discussion that we are having today. And particularly because we are having this conversation with Prime Minister Lee. I would like to thank again for your insightful talk and answering all the questions that we received today. Thank you so much. And also thank you so much for our audience for joining us. Please join me in thanking Prime Minister Lee.